I'm concerned that the Arborfield Cross Relief Road is not being delivered along with other junction changes before any houses are being built. I understand we are one of the few civilised countries where we actually build houses before we put in infrastructure, so we can't really do much about that. But in light of this, could you just, my first question is I would like to know when the Arborfield Cross Road will be delivered. The original plan said it was before the 750 houses, so if you'd like to make a note of that one. I'd also like to know what sort of timing we can expect California Crossroads. I'm unhappy with the Commonfield Lane suggestion and would urge that the road be constructed as a normal 2-lane road, as it would take the pressure off other routes, both in Barkham and Finchampstead, and could be an excellent route to the school rather than some rat run with passing places, as an increase in the traffic along this road will make such arrangement, I believe, dangerous. I'd also like you to confirm that the widths of the roads, because we have a number of developments in the borough where the widths of the roads are such that it's impossible to park. I know that some of them had lower parking standards that were pushed on us by the previous government, but I'd like to be sure that the roads that we're building on this development are maximum rather than minimum standard. Horse riding. Horse riding is a very important activity. I believe this area has the highest population of horse ownership and riders in the country. From this comes a local industry which offers employment, and in a lot of cases the first taste of responsibility and work experience for young people. In light of this, can you please confirm that the proposed greenways, it's already been done, but I'm saying it again, will be suitable and available for the use of the horses? And in addition, there will be consideration and consultation with the horse community as the different phases come forward. As this should this application be approved, I think it's only fair, because the only reason this garrison's here is because it was used by the horses so many years ago, and it would be a travesty not to honour that. The A327 Eversley. I believe there was a plan by Hampshire County Council to build a bypass along the lines of the bypass that the Woking Borough Council was planning for Arborfield. And I'd like to know whether or not that's coming forward, and if it is, when that would be. The 9 Mile Ride extension. When is it planned that this will be brought forward? Is it as a major artery for this development? I need to be confident that the buses and the frequency and some form of park and ride will be available, because there will be, it's considered there'll be a reasonably high use of sustainable travel from this development. So that's my first section, so if you'd like to answer that.
I know you don't tell us how many sections you've got, but okay, well,
we'll 3.
Arborfield Cross Relief Road timing, and California Crossroads timing, and comment on John's suggestion that Commonfield Lane should be upgraded to a proper 2-lane road.
Yep. I think I can remember the rest of them as well, so I'll start from the top. Arborfield Cross Relief Road, there was an indicative figure set around 750 at the cost strategy examination. And in all honesty, I think we're probably working towards a similar time scale anyway, bearing in mind that now there's been a slight fallback of the housing coming forward. The council, as you're aware, have undertaken the consultation, they're undertaking the design work. We're at a point now where we've spoken to all the landowners, we've got a design scheme, we've got a timeline for delivery, and it's we're looking to submit the application. All the environmental work is currently being undertaken, flood work. The application is due to go in with the next, I think it's towards the end of this year. We've obviously a contract being appointed the year after, construction starting 17, 2-year build, so we're looking to have it constructed around 19 into 20 at the latest. So that should hopefully pick up on that time. In terms of California Crossroads, what we've got is with the Section 106, I think the package we've put forward and that we're working with the steering group meeting at the moment is the best way for the council to go. In terms of funding, we've identified a trigger in the Section 106 that the funds are received for that by the 200th dwelling. So hopefully that 200 dwellings, we're probably talking, I would imagine, 2 years from commencement, or maybe from now, depending how fast the development moves. However, that gives us time working with the group to obviously identify a scheme and be ready to go, I guess, as soon as the money comes in on that element. Widening of Commonfield Lane, I know we have talked about this before, and it came up tonight from some of the residents as well. In terms of the application that's in front of us, the scheme that's put forward is policy compliant and meets the requirements of the planning application. I understand there are some aspirations, and that's the reason why we've transferred the works into contribution into the Section 106 to give us flexibility to move for local residents and members. Just obviously touching on a few points, we did obviously have a look at it because it did come up during the application, and by making it two-way, it does put quite a significant impact upon the Bull roundabout, and therefore it obviously wasn't deemed appropriate. It also drew traffic into Biggs Lane and then obviously through Arthurfield Cross up leading towards Windrush as well. So it didn't have the desired effect, or it didn't help with the development or with the surrounding network at that point. Although the security of the Section 106 funds does give us the ability to do something further. As I mentioned earlier, I think there is the ability of securing some land to the north, which would give the council options to do something further should it wish in the future. The widths of the road, I'll carry on with the rest of it, I'll remember it. The width of the road, yeah, there isn't really a minimum or maximum standard. The council has set a street hierarchy, and there's one secured obviously in the plan application. Minimum widths on the primary streets, 6.1 metres to obviously allow for buses to pass. We've also had the introduction through the MDD of our latest parking standards, and that obviously secures quite a good level. We've all had the recent SDL sites that come through planning committee have all been approved with a good level. We've got some of the schemes coming out of the ground now. Montague Park, for one of them, that has obviously that latest parking standard. And also there's elements of being able to secure money through the Section 106 potentially to identify any traffic regulation should they be needed on those routes to prevent on-street parking. But I feel with the level of parking standards that we have, we hope that shouldn't fall into place. But we'll also get the opportunity to review that at reserve matter stage. One of the key things is that we don't count garages as a parking space. Therefore, typically most developers to sell a property want to sell it with a garage. Therefore, you normally end up with 2 spaces plus the garage, theoretically giving someone 3 spaces, and therefore we're pretty much okay. The greenways, confirmed, as said earlier, they are all usable by horses, and the surface materials we touched on with the residents. A327 to Eversley. I'm starting to forget what I said now.
There was the
bypass.
The relief road that had been held by Hampshire for a long time.
Yeah, there was one held for a long time. We also held it in our local plan. We still maintain holding that, but I understand, I think Hampshire and Hart look to remove it from their plan until we've advised them that it was a good thing to do. It hasn't come up as part of this application, and therefore there is no requirement to deliver it, although we have secured it as a route. Should it come forward in the future due to further development in Eversley or in Alborough, then we will seek to obviously achieve funding from central government to assist in delivering, as we have with many other projects that the council is delivering. In terms of buses, we have a high frequency set out in this scheme. There is flexibility in Section 106 for us to deliver a very good enhanced service along with the My Journey travel planning that are secured. Frequency is good. There's a district centre which will have the security of an interchange which will link through to Shinfield, Woking and Bracknell, etc. and beyond into Reading. There is the possibility through the design of the district centre to incorporate maybe the shared, maybe some of the car parking for the school, the district centre, to form a little micro parking ride. And I understand where that's coming from, because in Shinfield and over School Green there's a small public car park, and the ability of the Leopard bus, which actually is a very good service that operates down into Arthurfield, a little mini micro parking ride site seems to have been created just by local residents who park in that area and jump on the bus to get in and out of Arthurfield or into Woking or Reading. So there is some benefit in potentially looking at that, or at least a park and share, as a lot of people do tend to also commute from certain areas. In rural areas that don't have the facility of public transport, they can drive into a more central area and pick up the good facilities.
Okay. Before we come on to any other budget, can we just clarify on what garages?
Yep.
You see discount, I thought we only discounted half. We counted garages half a parking space.
We do.
Right, okay, just wanted to be clear about that.
Yes.
Okay, fine, thank you. John.
My next one is, you can have the rest now, it's actually environment. Hopefully, if this application succeeds, we will see a good level of design, which could be put at risk if people try to change details and make additions to their houses. Can you please confirm all permitted development rights have been removed, meaning a planning application must be submitted before the commencement of any such work? That's my first question. Could we have, I'd like to know what percentage of the development is going to be green space and sports fields. Will all the houses meet Code 4? And will they meet our space and garden standards? Will high-speed broadband be available from day one? And what measures are being taken with regards to renewable energy? And the last one we'd like to know is, we've heard concerns with regards to the drainage from Philip. Are we sure that these issues can be addressed?
Okay. I think I've got one of those cases.
I think so.
So, first one was permitted development rights. I think we can confirm that they've been removed.
Yeah, I refer Councillor Kaiser to condition 9, which refers, withdraws permitted development rights from properties, and also a further condition which removes the permitted development rights to convert garages as well.
Just before we move on, can we just get clarification? There are currently a 3-year trial on householder rights that enable people to do quite significant extensions without formal planning permission, which are not universally popular. What is the position of those versus removal of permitted development rights? Does one trump the other?
If there were permitted development rights,
No,
those
no,
permitted
no,
development
I mean,
rights
just-
would be
I'm-
extended, but in this case, as there's no permitted development rights, the new householders wouldn't have the right to have those extended extensions.
I think the next one was percentage of green space.
52%.
Okay, then the issues regarding Code 4, which for the uninitiated is level of insulation and power consumption in the properties. Also something that as a committee we're very keen on, because the UK has a reputation for building the smallest houses in Europe, that the houses will meet our internal and external space standards, and that there will be high-speed broadband.
In regards to the Code for Sustainable Homes, I refer Councillor Kaiser to condition 49, which requires that dwellings to be required to achieve these Code for Sustainable Homes level 4, and also sets requirements for the commercial buildings as well. In terms of the space and garden standards, the applicants made a commitment to meet our standards in their design and access statement addendum. That will be an approved document with the planning application. So we have confidence in that matter moving forward to the reserve matters. In terms of broadband, there's a condition here to require ducting to be put in place. I understand that the developers have been speaking to broadband providers, and certainly when we had this discussion a couple of months ago at the Utilities Forum, there was a principle agreement in place that the site would be served by broadband.
I think it would be very unwise of any developer in this area not to provide that, because we have one of the highest levels of internet coverage in the country, and I'm sure that would be expected. John, you have some more points? Sorry, did I miss one?
Just the
Oh,
drainage.
renewables and drainage.
Yeah. So in terms of renewable energy, condition 50 requires development to go 10% beyond building regulations in terms of carbon emissions. There's also a requirement in the district centre development brief. So when that's being worked up, we have a real full understanding of what the uses are going to be and how they're going to be located, for the developers to consider the suitability of the area for a district heating system. And drainage. In terms of drainage, I draw Councillor Kaiser's attention to the fact that the Environment Agency hasn't rejected the application. Our flood risk expert, internal expert, hasn't either, and the comprehensive suite of conditions in the report. I don't think there's any reason to think that it's not achievable.
Just on the drainage, I'd like to think we look at the betterment, as was mentioned earlier on. My last, I've only really got one last question. This development, it's not really a planning issue, but this development site, if approved, will take many years, and there are many serviceable buildings on the site. Are they planned to be left derelict until such time that the developers can get round to them, or are they planned to use them for something else?
It's a clear matter that we'll be discussing with developers going forward. In terms of the buildings to be retained, most important buildings to be retained, we're making sure that those are being kept in an appropriate condition so they don't degrade prior to their reuse. Within the planning conditions, there's a requirement as part of the construction management plan for the developers to consider the temporary workers on the site. and whether they might be appropriate to reuse some of the buildings on the site to accommodate them.
Such as the gymnasium, for example.
A number of them.
Chris, will you the next?
Thank you, Simon. I've got questions on traffic, the arrangements for Wokingham Station, buses, and also a question on primary school. I think from the traffic point of view, if one looks at the question of what is, I think, well, first of all, I want to say I've raised a number of questions with Chris, and I've had a very comprehensive reply, so thank you very much for that. I think I'd still like to raise some of those issues because I think for the benefit of the public here that they should know what questions are being asked. I think looking at the question of severe impact, this does have a major impact, not just within the SDL but externally. And I'm looking for some general reassurance, if you like, that within the standards that we have in terms of capacity of the roads, are there any areas which cause concern, let's say going up to 2026, in terms of this ratio of flow to capacity? That's one thing. I think, shall I give you all the traffic ones together? I think looking at California Crossroads, you mentioned that there's a 1 hour period at each end of the day. My concern there, I appreciate that it's probably very early in terms of the working group, but are you confident in fact that a solution can be found for those periods where we will not have excessive delays? Barkham Road, the Barkham Road corridor it's referred to, I think here with the bridge, the narrow bridge, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. By widening that bridge, allowing for two-way traffic, what is the impact in terms of other junctions if there will be a greater total flow of traffic going that way? I think then also in terms of there's been a lot of comment about country lanes, both in the document and also already this evening. And it's very difficult, obviously, to predict what's going to be happening there. But I would question what provision are we going to make for monitoring whether, in fact, we have a problem during and, let's say, later on in the development. The station, Wokingham Station, here there's a question of should we make the parking provision? Should we actually arrange for public transport? Again, there's a balance there. But I think that one thing I would be concerned about is what the frequency of buses are going to be to and from the station. In fact, it's been mentioned, I think you said there would be a 60-minute service initially into Wokingham. I would be concerned that if we have a 60-minute service, and this is just for phase 1 of the development, we will already be developing a pattern of travel where people say, I'm not prepared, they've missed the bus, I'm not prepared to wait an hour for the next one. So do we just see the car travel, the car transport going forward? Maybe I'll come back to the school question, maybe the transport ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I think in terms of the wider network, without getting down to the individual RFCs on each junction or degree of saturation, wherever it may be, I think we have to bear in mind it is a large development. It's 2,000 or 3,500, of which the whole area has been assessed, and even further, so in terms of the modelling, the strategic transport has been assessed, including Saffron for Wokingham, North Wokingham, the town centre, South Wokingham, etc. And therefore encompassing everything. The package of measures identified through the core strategy and the infrastructure delivery contributions document identified the Eastern Relief Road, the Alton Cross Relief Road, the Winnish Relief Road came a little bit later on, the Northern Distributors Road, so all of those. You then get down obviously to more local schemes identified around this development. We've got the 9 Mile Ride, which the 9 Mile Ride itself will improve significantly Park Lane and Biggs Lane, which currently receive a fair amount of traffic, obviously trying to get through to 9 Mile Ride, heading east-west across the borough. You also have HGV movements. Now, a lot of HGVs are understood to use Park Lane north and south, which get down to the industrial park. As part of the work that we've done with HSC and MFT, We've identified a potential new link, for example, off of the Narmer Road extension into Hogwood. We've transferred some land from the property service team, which will now been transferred to highway to allow for a new junction to be incorporated at the entrance to Hogwood, for example. So those facilities will enable HGV and other traffic, obviously travelling east-west, to come through the A57 Narmer Ride, connect through to Hogwood, allow for Park Lane to be downgraded. So that obviously changes some of the character of the local area. A lot of the other junction improvements, the Alpha Cross Relief Road is quite significant. So I think overall, most of the junction improvements reach or get to the point where the RFCs are acceptable and the junctions are working adequately. A couple I demonstrated earlier. But I think we do need to bear in mind that obviously, national planning policy guidance and severe impact, that overall, on balance, not even on balance, overall, all of the junctions actually get to a place where journey times across the area aren't actually significantly affected. So bringing you back, I guess, to the point you then made about Barkham and California Cross in some respects. So Barkham, by making the two-lane bridge, yes, there is an element that vehicles will then obviously be able to get to the Barkham Ball pub roundabouts quicker. However, in terms of that corridor, I think we're looking at it in terms of the corridor, the traffic actually isn't any different. It may move obviously from the bridge, but the element of looking at that was more of a safety issue because there has been some concerns around that area, and obviously bringing it to the roundabout. Now, quite strangely, when we had a look at the roundabout, it didn't actually operate that differently, and there were some kind of improvements because you got a better, instead of platooning traffic up to that roundabout, you end up getting a bit more of a balanced flow, and it tended to operate quite well. California Crossroads, I would like to think, again, AGLC and MFC, both highways consultants, put forward options that came up with schemes that could potentially work in that location. And we did have a look at them, but we felt obviously it was best to try and get something that the council have been looking for a number of years. Funding obviously has been obviously on the short side in that area. Obviously working with the action group to also deliver something in that area was a much more appropriate measure. I think the cost initially for some of the schemes identified with the developers was actually quite less. We've done quite a bit of work internally and with the developers to identify and increase that figure up to quite a sizable sum of, I think it's around 2.2 million for that junction. So I think we're working with the group, the action group, the landowners, the residents and the employers in the area, we could quite significantly come up with an improvement. And it is to be said that it is, I think I don't think signals are best in that area. I don't think, we want to look at something kind of keeping the character, keeping it flowing. It does flow. There are some constraints, and I'm not blaming it on the lollipop, but obviously when she steps in the road to let people across, then obviously there is a hold up of traffic. So we need to look at how all modes kind of mix and share at that junction to see if we can actually make a way for them all to work together to improve the flow of that junction, which will aid things greatly. Monitoring of local roads, without sounding funny, the best way of monitoring it is when the residents actually start kind of saying there's a larger increase in traffic on my routes, on my country lane. Now, I know sometimes people class these as rat runs. They are public highways, they are adopted, and they are alternative routes. If they are failing, if there's a lot of traffic on there, White Horse Lane has been obviously identified, then we've had a look at it, we've identified it. If there's a need, then obviously we will look to improve it. And I think as part of the assessments that have been done by the application, there aren't any others than what we've identified that have that issue. Although over time things do change, there is a construction period of 15 years. We can't be fully accurate of what people may do in terms of distribution or redistribution of the network. And we find here, Station Road has been shut now for a number of weeks. It's shut for a number of more weeks. And it's quite strange, the first couple of days when people transfer onto a different route, there is a little bit of panic, how are we going to cope? And then it settles down, and we haven't really had any complaints, and people get on with their lives. There is a little bit of transfer to other roads which don't expect it, but then it settles and things tend to work. But we will be able to keep an eye on that as things go on, and we will be in the area monitoring. Working Station Link Road's gone in, there is a change, there is an interchange, public transport can get there quite easily. There is spare capacity in the car park. The town centre is also being regenerated, and there's a new car park coming in Carnival Hall in the next 2 years. And therefore there will be even more capacity in the town within close proximity to the station car park should people wish to drive. Now obviously that isn't desirable, and we do wish to get people on public transport, but I think the reason that the level of service and the frequency is staying the same in the first phases is because the identification from the site is the majority of people wish to go to Reading to obviously pick up on the greater services in and out of Reading Station, and therefore the frequency at the moment is there until obviously more houses come online and the viability of the bus services are that we can increase and add additional buses to get more people, maybe to give them more choice of working with Bramham.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Chris. Can I, there was just the one extra to on the schools thing. And that is the question of the primary school. My question, which I had raised before, was about the total provision of the number of form entries. What actually is planned there? What I'm concerned is the rate of development of the combined, let's say 4,000 houses. What are the plans in terms of primary school provision? Does that come under this heading for discussion this evening? I'm thinking that where S506 is being negotiated, what is being covered within that in terms of total provision of primary education?
Okay, the Section 106 agreement secures a two-form entry primary school within the garrison site to be delivered by the 250th dwelling. The school site is oversized, such that if the need arose in the future, it could be expanded to three-form entry. In terms of the wider
recall, Chris, we did that at the Park. You may recall that's exactly what we did at Buckhurst Park, where we had a three-form school built with only two form entry equipped. The other could be brought onto stream with short notice.
Yes, but there's also a question of the total requirement for the site. I appreciate we're looking at the 2,000 houses now, but how does that...
There is a further primary school supposed to be provided as part of the NFT application as and when that comes through.
Fine, thank you.
All right. I've got Lindsay next and then Michelle.
Thank you. Yes, parts of this application are quite impressive. I also agreed with John's comments over there at the list you go through. There was quite a few things. I have some specific points I want to come back on. First on flooding and drainage. Is there any part of this area that's in flood zone 2 or flood zone 3? Secondly, are we sure, you mentioned two conditions that were referred to when Failure gave her presentation. The second one, which was about maintenance, had an ongoing cost associated with it. I wasn't quite sure that was covered in that particular condition. Can you come back on that? And also I would like a bit more clarity on that first point that was raised, because I'm not 100% certain it's fully covered, but I understood you had a condition there. On the internal aspects of minimum and maximum, Chris will know my view on minimum parking and maximum parking. We've had a discussion on that. If we've got parcels of land in the phases and we've got so many houses, what I think we've all had concern about is that we get part of that, it gets very dense, and whilst the overall average, and we were talking about having it go nowhere below a minimum figure in an area. Are we following that type of approach, because we were discussing that? Also, under the other issues we spoke about on the RCLUs covered as well. Is that excluded? The certificate legal use that's covered in that issue that we spoke about it not being allowed. On the relief road, one concern I've got is there enough funds for it to complete the relief road? In other words, is what we're getting, this is the money to provide the road, or is there a set sum? And if there is a set sum, could we end up being in the middle of a field somewhere, not quite having enough money to get there? I just want to make sure that we are... We're actually providing a full end-to-end relief road. On the buses, we had a planning application earlier this month where we were talking about when it is being developed, as it is being developed, if we put something in place while it's there, so as the people move in and they've got a bus service to get them to somewhere, and I'm thinking mainly about commuters here, people will commute to Reading, people will commute to Wokingham. I think we need to encourage some form of bus commuter service that enables people who go there so that they don't use their cars, so they can get there in the morning and evening rush hour services and it links in with the overall scheme that we're looking at. And I think that if we can bring that into it, and the developers can look at that so when they put it in, rather than a strict timetable, because you wouldn't necessarily need buses to 11, 12 all the time. It's a question of getting people for the most time at the most impact.
About peak hour buses.
Peak hour buses, yes. And we need to link it in with all the others. I know we've got a working group being set up later, but I think that is something that if we can encourage developers to feed in, rather than rigidly sticking to a timetable, that's the sort of thing. What was the nearest to the nearest railway station? Is it Wokingham or is it Reading? I think it would be depending on what the services are. We might be Twyford.
Crowthorne is the nearest, it doesn't have the most impressive of services.
Right, no. On page 12, under specific issues, J, details location and timing of mixed uses in the district centre with a programme for at least 25% of the commercial floor space to be complete by the occupation of the 1,000th residential unit. That feels quite late in the scheme. I'd like some comment on that. And my final question is there actually an end time? Can we condition an end time when everything's done? Concerns about it dragging on for 10 or 15 years, or can we put condition in that it needs to be finished by a particular point, or is that outside our remit?
Okay, questions there. So firstly, Matt, if you could take the issues about flood zone 2 or 3, ongoing cost of maintenance. Chris, if you could take the parking issues that were raised and the funding. Matt, could you cover the COUs? And yes, Lindsay, I raised the same point about 25% commercial at the halfway point on housing, and I'm afraid, although I raised that a few days ago, I can't recall what the answer is. So I'll leave that to the experts. And also the issue about end time as well. So off you go.
Shall I pick up all of mine in one go?
Yes.
So on the Environment Agency maps, which are produced at a very high level, identifies a very small area of flood zone 2 up by the lake. But because the Environment Agency mapping has been done at such a high level, the developers have done much more detailed mapping, identification, modelling all the watercourses across the site to actually identify the areas that flood. So they've gone far beyond just looking at the Environment Agency maps. They've used those flooding maps looking at the 1 in 100 event plus and allowing some climate change as the regulations require to identify where flooding is likely to occur and to make sure the sensitive uses are kept away from that area.
So in simplistic terms, is there any proposal for any houses on flood zone 2?
No.
Okay.
In terms of the SUDs, I think the SUDs which are going to be within the highway boundary, within green space and so forth. Those we have provisions in the 106 to make sure that we adopt those areas in large green space and so forth. So I think it's in the council's interest to make sure that the design of the SUDs coming forward are high quality and are robust. So when we adopt them, they carry on working. In terms of the commercial floor space, the 1,000 was identified because there's other triggers in section 106 making the district centre in relation. So the community centre, there's a trigger for that to be provided by the 1,000th dwelling within the community centre. So it was felt that was an appropriate time because the development is getting going and it would be likely to be viable for businesses to open in the district centre. It doesn't prevent development coming forward sooner if it's viable to do so, but issues like this are very much driven by viability, and so as the local authority, planning department, there's a limited amount we can do, but it was considered this was a reasonable trigger to at least do our bit to try and make sure things are moving forward. In terms of the end time, condition number 2, part D requires that the last phase of development should start as revised in the update sheet, the last phase of development
Right.
should start no later than 17 years from the date of its permission. It is 2,000 dwellings, which is a lot of houses, so it provides a degree of flexibility to allow for the economic cycles and for housing to get to be delivered faster and slower.
So if it starts on the 1st of January 2016, then it's 17 years to then until it has to be done.
So it was, I think I'm sorry, 17 years is for the commencement of the last phase.
Are we happy with that? Feels a long time.
17 years from commencement is the last.
So the last phase should commence within 17 years.
Chris?
In terms of the questions on car parking standards, you're right, Lindsay, we've had obviously a number of conversations around this. In terms of the application in front of us, it's only outlined, but in terms of condition 25, it sets out that any reserve VAT application should be in accordance with the council's parking standards at that time,
Right.
which is new, so they should still be in place. I would also mention that obviously we've said before, any reserve VAT application that comes forward, we will ensure that there is a list, a programme of parkings for each unit, setting out each parking space provided with it, so you can clearly see it's not on an average. You'll be able to see the individual parking spaces associated with every unit, which will make it much easier. In terms of the Alderfield Cross Relief Road and its delivery, now obviously there are two housing developers on this development site. There's AGRC and the MFT, and that application will be coming forward at another point. In terms of identifying the cost of the road has been identified, and that's been divided between 4/7 towards AGRC and 3/7 towards MFT for the costs. And what we've done to ensure is that, because there was this trigger John mentioned about the 750, although that's a figure that's here or there, in terms of the Alderfield Cross Relief Road, we've identified that trigger that we will have all the funds from AGRC by the 700th dwelling. So the council will be in control of all that money before the road is required, but we also have identified LEP funding which will enable us to obviously start delivering that road soon.
Could I just come back? Could I just come back on that point about 4/7 and 3/7? It's fine. You've identified that the road is a certain cost. Inflation always comes along, and there's always an unknown factor. What I'm saying is are the developers covering that cost of the road, even if there were a rise in it, or are they providing a set figure? And if that road rise should increase, is there then a shortfall?
These contributions are index linked. So if things are later delivered, the sum changes favourably.
Was almost an answer.
Okay, well, I'll leave it to one of the professionals to give you more detail on it.
Is it a yes or no? What I don't want to have is a situation that we suddenly find that we're short and we've got the road 500 yards short of where we want to need to go with no money.
Yeah, contingency figures have also been built into that cost as well, although it has been costed by the District Valuer's Office, which has provided more benefit, and there is the interest element that is the link index. You also mentioned buses and obviously the peak hour services. As I mentioned before, there is a public transport strategy and obviously the group that needs to be set up. There's the My Journey element, obviously, that they're buying into. And you are correct, we would like to obviously deliver as many services as early as possible to encourage people to use alternative modes. Obviously, there is the risk there that in terms of viability, you could spend the money quite quickly and therefore run out, and there wouldn't be services running forward. However, the peak hour service is definitely something that we could consider. The frequency, I think, off-peak is good for the first phases. And I think obviously we could look to improve that in the peak hours by obviously adding something more through the My Journey funding or through obviously the flexible pot that we have for the Section 106 for public transport, and that will be looked at and progressed. But no, I'm in agreement that that is something we do need to consider.
Simon, through you, could we indicate to the developers who are here whether that sort of issue is something they're willing to look at and take on?
Well, I'm sure we can ask them that. I think it's probably a little unfair to ask them to make a commitment until we tell them what it is we're actually looking for.
But it's a principle.
Indications to date are that they've been reasonable in considering
sensibly phrased requests. Rochelle.
Chris, I've got a few highways questions for you, unfortunately. You've mentioned that there's no real effect on Winnish. However, there's no construction ban on King Street Lane, Mole Road, Bearwood Road, or the new Hatch Farm Dairies part of the Relief Road included in this. Next, let's see. You opened up Winnish Relief Road, one of my favorite subjects. You're describing Winnish Relief Road Part 2, and you're saying that that is part of the traffic possible effects from this. Has WBC actually purchased the land for Winnish Relief Road Part 2? Have they designed anything yet?
Michelle,
And I realize,
Michelle, I just need to remind you,
yes,
this is a planning application.
but he did open
It
it.
covers
and-
Arborfield, doesn't cover the
I
provision in the future or acquisition of land in Winnish, so we must keep to the main subject, please.
But he did actually
Yes,
bring it up as part of this,
We'll
so I
get the
wanted to
answers
ask him
about
about.
the impacts on Winnish. We're not going to areas about acquisition of land for Winnish Relief.
Okay, then further questions about the park and rides. About the park and rides in Arborfield. Will there be a connection to the Winnish Park and Ride? Because there will be a connection from Winnish Park and Ride to Crossrail eventually, at least according to some of our plans. I want to see if there's some coordination there so we can have Crossrail. And Winnish Triangle may be a closer station than Wokingham for some of the residents there, especially if the Arborfield Relief Road dumps out onto Mole Road. It might be a good way for them to come up, and they'll be cutting through the Hatch Farm Berries Road, et cetera, et cetera. Next, I'd like to ask you about connections. You've talked about bicycle paths and things like this within the development. Are there any connections to the external bicycle paths? Any provisions for bicycle paths to Wokingham, to Reading, to Winnish Crossroads, to things like this, to Winnish Triangle, as possibilities? Because if you want to have them shift how they're getting from one place to another, there are buses, there are bikes, there are different ways of doing it, and this is all part of the My Journey area, but what are you planning to do?
Okay. I think just to kind of pick up on, I'll just finish off the Winnish Relief Road. I mentioned that as part of the wider borough strategic infrastructure that's taking place, so therefore, whilst there is no identified impact upon Winnish, I understand that your concerns were obviously that Winnish, and therefore there are infrastructure measures going in place that covers the strategy as a whole. In terms of park and rides, there are no park and rides in Arborfield. There was talk around the district centre and through obviously working, there might be the requirement or the desire to have a micro park and ride given the rural edges. So therefore, as it stands, there wouldn't be a desire at this time to link those park and rides with Winnish or Muro, which are significant park and rides. The Arborfield Cross Relief Road doesn't connect it with Mole Road, therefore there wouldn't be any requirement for it to link up. That was option A, which wasn't the option that was picked. Option B was the one that was picked, linking to the 327. And cycleways, I think the greenways has been mentioned quite a few times, and that is the connections. The internal cycle network from the development site links out, connecting to a hefty, significant link of greenway routes linking to the edges through to Reading, Wokingham, Barkham, Finch Hampstead, everywhere else in that area. 41 kilometres of greenways that are looking to be delivered as part of the borough route.
Construction bans.
Construction bans. The construction bans that are obviously put on here, being this is the application area, they identified them quite early on and they were in the application, the transport assessment. In terms of the construction management plan, we don't normally get something like this early on. This was something that was put forward as an output. We won't be touching these roads, obviously through conversations that the applicant had with the local parish and councils. Obviously in terms of Winnish, we will cover the whole routes that obviously are coming in at that time, but it's expected that most, depending when the contract is let, it will be on the main roads, the A roads, so it's likely to be coming from the north, A327, or from Hampshire or the A27, whichever direction the contractors have been appointed.
I would just like some coordination with Winnish Parish Council to be able to make sure that there aren't construction traffic going down there, because there are a primary school right on those roads.
We can look at that when the condition, when they submit the details for the condition. Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Just a few general questions, really. One, to remind you, when you do your summing up, to define exactly what we're we're looking at tonight. On the trees, in the application it mentions that there's some TPOs, trees that have got TPOs on that will be removed. I have difficulty with removing trees and replacing them with other trees, which are usually probably about the size of a twig. But we put Code 4 on sustainable homes, and yet we were happy to allow people to cut down trees which mitigate greenhouse gases. So I find that very difficult. I'd like to comment on that. On the flooding, there was a flood a few years ago in Poperinghe Way, and it went straight through my ex-wife's house and out the front door. I just want to make sure that flood mitigation is actually going to cover up any events like that that might happen, even though she blamed me for it. The last question I've got is, did I understand you just say that there was shared cycle and pedestrian pavement? Because I think they're an absolute disaster. I mean, I've seen cyclists whipping down roads with pedestrians on, and if they hit one, they'd end up about 30 yards down the road. And the only time at weekends, the only time I can see them actually useful is for cyclists to come down the road, nip on the pavement at a traffic light, go across and out the other side, thus missing the red lights. So I think they're absolute disaster, but never mind.
I'm going to try and answer your question about trees firstly, actually, because I think one bit of history. When the site was first identified, the council took steps to impose a very significant number of tree preservation orders on the site before we knew what was going to come forward to put us in control. So I think, yes, some of those are being lost, but in many cases there would have been no protection on any of the trees, so we've ended up in a better position than if we had just left it as it is, and we would then be faced a loss of a lot of trees. We've also seen very clear indications from the way it's been presented and the quality of development they're trying to bring forward that the developer has recognised and appreciates the significance of trees in the landscape, and bluntly that enables them to offer more attractive houses. So I think there are no category A trees at all being lost in the whole scheme. So I think to some extent, yes, we are losing some TPO trees, but they're trees that we only put TPOs on a couple of years ago to put us in control while this was all going on.
Sorry, like that's why we couldn't get a tree official to come and look at any other trees in the borough.
Correct. That's they're all clogged up here.
Okay.
I'd also just point out there's particular conditions relating to the protection of hedgerows, and so particular conditions relating to the protection of hedgerows and veteran and ancient trees as well, which are the most special trees within the site. In terms of flooding, was your specific query?
Just to make sure that the flood that happened in
Yeah.
precisely Poperinghe Way is going to be mitigated
Absolutely.
and not likely to happen again.
Well, the flood risk assessment, which I say has been assessed and agreed, provides comfort that there'll be no flooding on the site or impact off the site as well. And it's probably worth saying that the flooding which happened on the Garrison at the beginning of last year, photographs were taken of that, and that was used to help calibrate the model that the developers have used.
The last point is, Councillor Cowan mentioned some conditions he'd like added to the application. I just wonder what the view would be on those conditions.
I think Bob, they were actually already incorporated in some form or other in the development. And I certainly spoke to Councillor Cowan outside the meeting to give him some reassurances on that.
Happy on it, thank you.
Okay. Right, Malcolm?
My question is about which some John Kaiser raised earlier and answered, but I made a couple of comments to add to them. On the roads, I think we mentioned that the main roads would be a minimum of 6.1 metres or something, so you can allow 2 buses or first bus, which is okay. But I'd like to make a plea for the other roads, the residential roads. They have over many years been built far too narrow, which means that if somebody parks a car on the road outside the house, people can't get past very easily, so they tend to park on pavement. And pavement parking is not liked. It can damage the pavement, it can damage the services underneath. But if the roads are too narrow, they tend to park there because they think it's blocked the road otherwise. So it's a plea really for residential and side roads to have sufficient width so that if a car is left on the road, nice and legally, that it doesn't actually obstruct the road or a problem. That's one point.
I think we've luckily had the ability to be working with the applicant who have started to progress obviously some reserve matters parts of this application as well. And I think through some of the street hierarchy elements, we are looking at the road widths. And typically where we find now with the parking standards that on-street parking isn't always an issue, but in terms of we've got an allocated and a visitor provision that we do look at, and therefore in such a lot of the roads tend to have your road and then a street verge which may have tree planting in it. Now obviously in those areas we've been looking at trying to incorporate any on-street parking or the potential for any visitor space to kind of be located within that verge. You may have a tree, a grass verge, a parking space, a tree, a grass verge, parking space, to incorporate a nice street scene, to take on-street cars off the carriageway section, but also to provide an area that's desirable to have your pedestrian cycleway maybe offset from being directly adjacent to the carriageway by a separation of the curb. So.
Thank you. The other one, just pretty quickly, off-road car parking for houses we've covered. That seems to be quite generous, I think, in the numbers mentioned. Bridleways were relevant because of the number of horses in the area, so I'm glad to see that they're being covered. Adopting roads as well, because I've heard stories in the past of roads taking a very long time to be adopted, and until they're adopted, quite often it affects the ability to do maintenance on the roads, in terms of cutting grass and maintaining green areas properly. So if they're adopted, then it makes life much easier generally. So that's a comment on that. Thank you.
Okay, I think that was more of a comment than a question, wasn't it?
There was a comment, yes. So can we make sure we do adopt them? Okay, is this the question?
Would you like to comment on
Yeah, I can
the
do that.
speed of adoption?
Yeah, I mean, obviously in terms of section 38, which is the on-site provision of the assessment, we've got an in-house team that will review that. We're already talking with the applicant because there are a number of roads internally to the site which are there, and we've given them the specification, all the requirements that we need in terms of coring and understanding what the makeup of those roads are, and those getting that information early obviously assist in obviously making sure we can adopt the roads and obviously understand the drainage on site for the water company to obviously adopt them as well.
Right, members.
Simon, there are a couple of things. Sorry. Well, I didn't get an answer to my comments about the flooding conditions. You gave an answer before the first time, but I wanted particularly clarification that the condition you've got covering maintenance, and I think Bailey mentioned about ongoing maintenance afterwards, and working about being left with a bill. I want to check that condition is strong enough. And there was the other issue that you raised at that point, which was another condition you mentioned. So I just want clarification on that. And so when you look on that, and the other issue I've got relates to condition 2, the changes to condition 2, which is in page 2 of the update. I've got some concerns. If I look at D, reading it could be 19 years from agreement or approval of the planning application before everything's been still done. And I thought that's probably almost as bad as our waste time. That gives me some concerns. And equally in B, I noticed that the remaining reserve matters have been extended from 10 to 15 years. And I think that links in because the two numbers add up when you do 15 and 17, but I would like to know why, because that does mean that residents nearby could be having development of some stage or whatever occurring for a very long time.
So Lindsay, so you're proposing that houses should be bought, more houses should be built more quickly?
Well, yeah, I think 17 years is exceedingly. I think 17 years is for 2,000 houses is exceedingly long time. That's only 130 a year.
Well,
Living in a building.
Okay,
I think we do now.
just a moment. Developer would like to comment on that.
Thanks.
No, fine, all right. Mark, would you the timescales? Lindsay believes the timescales for delivery are unduly protracted.
From the developer's point of view,
You speak up since you haven't the mic.
sorry, from the developer's point of view, obviously this permission needs to survive various market cycles. And although it is our clear intention to deliver sooner than that, there needs to be the flexibility in the permission to allow for market forces and cycles to enable the development to be built out within this permission.
You have to have regard, excuse me, you have to have regard that the MFT land will be coming forward in parallel, and therefore across this development area, that may be the equivalent of 250.
Indeed, but for this purpose of these conditions, we're applying them specifically to your site. So, okay. Would you like to
Seek
add
advice
anything to
on
that?
this.
Just a minute. Would you like to add anything to it, Matt?
Not particularly in respect to the time limit addition. So the core strategy envisages a 15-year build out of the site. So 17 years plus, as the as mentioned, a small amount of flexibility around that.
I'd also point out that we haven't introduced any specific limits. I think, Arun, perhaps you could give out. We haven't put such limits on any of the earlier SDOs. That I can recall.
No, Chairman, indeed it would be quite unusual to try to condition when a development might be built out by. Quite difficult to enforce.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask Tim, you want to add something?
If we did reduce it to the 10 years and then they weren't built out, what would happen?
We'd then be faced with probably having to find new sites for houses over and beyond what we've already got, which opens up a whole new can of worms. Right. So, Lindsay, how do you want to take this forward? Is this a showstopper for you?
No, but I was thinking of the residents in the area, because if something's going on for so long.
Do bear in mind that compared with most sites, the sheer scale of this site and the fact that it's on a large proportion of it is being built on an army garrison that's behind the wire, there aren't a lot of immediate neighbours to quite a lot of the site. And those that there are coming forward in phases. So, for instance, when we went on the site visit, when we looked at the site of the school, you couldn't see a single house within the site of the school. So you've got to bear in mind, I understand your concerns, but I think we need to make sure it's also that's overlaid amongst the existing terrain and the availability of the existing houses.
Yes, when I said I was going to seek advice, I take the comment that it would have difficulty. If you're selling properties and there's an indication that it could be 17 years you're in a building site, that's going to have an impact on people as well, which is not part of the issue, but I think that to do that, it's not a showstopper from my perspective, but I do think it just feels a very long time.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I think if once developers have secured permission, they want to bring forward houses at a rate at which they can be sold. Some of you will remember what happened over in Bracknell with Jennings Park when the recession hit in 2007 and people were living on a ghost-like estate. Hopefully we won't experience anything of that nature again, but as we've heard, there needs to be some flexibility to allow for the inevitable cyclical nature of the housing market and demand. So,
and the other one was the conditions reference as well.
I can say that this condition was actually drafted in view of the comments we received from Mrs. Merrill and the Douglas officer, specifically put Part J on the condition to cover the issues that she raised.
okay, members, we've had a very comprehensive report. I'll try and sum up now if I can. I think this all started, as you know, with the adoption of a core strategy in 2010, which itself in turn followed on a very considerable period of discussion, concluding with a planning inspector spending, I think it's 5 weeks. A number of us were there, not for every day, but through that 5-week independent look at whether what we were bringing forward was correct. And as I say, that was approved by the planning inspector and adopted by the council in 2010. We know the Army is going. In all fairness, the Army have told us they'd be going in 2008, 2010, 2012, and most recently 2015. I actually believe them this time, and we actually have a letter from the Secretary of State as well to confirm that.
They have packed the boxes before.
Okay. It's a very comprehensive scheme. It's the last of the strategic development locations that's come forward. And I think it would be fair to say, I'd like to think that the officers in the development team and the parish councils involved have probably learned through that process. And I would like to think that this proposal is an improvement as opposed to if it had been the very first of the SDLs, because I think we've all learned and we've found better ways of working, better ways of addressing concerns. But let's not underestimate, this is the first of a whole series of applications on this site in terms of reserved matters that will be coming forward to be considered by this committee or our successors for quite a few years to come. So we will become increasingly familiar with it, as we already are with the Shinfield M4 sites, North Woking and South Woking sites. The whole proposal contains very considerable developer contributions. I think you're aware that the developer contributions sought by developers in Woking are amongst the highest in the country, yet they still want to go and build here. And there's been obviously a very protracted period of public consultation, both informally and formally, over the many years. So we have an application, which I think one of my colleagues alluded to. No application is ever absolutely perfect, because you'd never actually get there. But I think it's a very good framework. And I believe the reserved matters that will come forward in the future will enable us to ensure that it's refined over time and that we have a development, whatever it may be called, that we can look on with some pride in due course. So members, you have a very clear recommendation in front of you. I've seen no members putting forward alternative resolutions to those put forward by the officer to grant approval. Therefore, I will put that to the committee that this application should be approved subject to all the items contained in the members' update, which, whilst at 24 pages looks rather comprehensive, it's actually relisting all the conditions and just showing the very small changes that have occurred to some of those. So members, as I say, without further ado, I'm going to put that straight to the vote. As you know, we have another application to consider this evening. So members, could all those wishing to support this application please indicate. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you, members, and thank you to the audience for bearing with us for the last 2.5 hours on this. We will now be a 5-minute break, and we will then go on to the school application side. Your forbearance, we now come on to the full application for the secondary school. One thing I did forget to mention during the earlier presentation is, of course, members of the planning committee have visited the military site and the surrounding area on 2 separate occasions to familiarise themselves with it. Of course, for many people, it was the first time they'd been behind a wire, and as someone who's lived in Yarra all my life, it was quite unusual for me to stand probably 1.5 miles from where I live and honestly not say I could recognise anything within sight. So this application is for a new secondary school, and we are going to get a presentation from Matt and Neil this evening. You're going to be doing a double act? Yep. Right. I think on that basis, because we have time against us, we will go straight on to that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give an overview of the planning application and pass across to my colleague Neil, who's the case officer and has some more detailed knowledge. So the application is a full application for phase construction of a 1,500 place secondary school with the associated sports facilities, parking provisions and access. The principle is establishing a core strategy in terms of all the uses in the SDL and specifically identifies a secondary school. And the site forms part of the wider development strategy. The proposal respects and utilises the landscape context and has been formulated in collaboration with the parent reference group. Just a whip was over this slide we've seen before, showing the location of the site in the context of the wider SDL, is in the district centre at the southern end of the AGLC side, and effectively in the centre of the SDL. The site will serve the southern counties of Woking. It's planned to be the first phase of construction in the development of the SDL. The wider SDL development includes 2 primary schools, one in the north and one in the south, and a secondary school, and will form part of an integrated education solution for the SDL. The design proposal takes full advantage of its rural setting, but also fits in with the garden city character that we've been aspiring to deliver in the district centre by proposing a 2-storey building with a strong inside-outside ethos. Whilst trees will be lost in order to accommodate sporting facilities, which are on the east side of the site, a comprehensive landscape strategy, including tree placement, will be implemented to enhance the site. Additional ecological measures are proposed to mitigate and enhance the wildlife value of the site. The building design and overall proposal has evolved with the input of the parent reference group and goes beyond the minimum to form a development respects its setting and reflects the integrated approach to the wider village-style community proposed as part of the wider Arkfield Garrison SDL development.
Thanks. First slide here shows the aerial view of the site with the yellow triangle marking the approximate location of the school site. Red line area of the school site encompasses the school building, car parking, sports hall and sports pitches. It also includes the access points to the public highway for the purpose of construction access and future access to the school. The main issues arising as a result of the public consultation process revolve around the highways infrastructure, pollution control during construction and design of the school building. The transport statement was submitted as part of the application based on the wider development transport assessment. The transport statement is the main mechanism for ensuring suitable access arrangements are delivered for all appropriate modes of transport, including buses, pedestrians and cycle access. The statement looks in detail at the phased access issues and informs the framework travel plan that was also submitted as part of the detailed application. Full travel plan will be required through condition to promote and encourage pedestrian, cycle and bus access and will evolve with the development of the school. It will be reviewed and revised at appropriate times, for example, following the school admissions process when information as to the distribution of the pupils becomes available. Conditions can be used to ensure the adequate delivery of access to the school during its phased development. It's clear that the access to the school would benefit from the delivery of the wider development associated with the 2 residential applications. However, the school application has been designed to be delivered independently and as a result is not dependent on the wider infrastructure development of the SDL initially. Obviously, the SDL has been identified in core policy as an integrated development. The plan here shows how the school proposal can integrate into the wider development to the north of the SDL. And this shows the integration to the south of the SDL with the triangle marking the approximate location of the school site. Moving on to pollution control, it's a key element of construction on any site. The main issues that give rise to the most concern and potentially would give rise to the greatest environmental impacts are basically contamination, noise, light, hydraulics, dust and potential impacts on the health of site operatives and sensitive receptors such as school occupants. To control pollution aspects of construction, we require a construction environmental management plan on all major sites of this nature. And these cover the issues of noise, dust, lighting, traffic, water, unexpected contamination, hours of working, environmental management systems, and liaison officers, just as some of the principal basics. They also cover much more detail in the condition on the recommendation that outlines the precise details of what a construction environmental management plan covers. And obviously this document is one that is used to control any potential pollution impacts. The primary purpose of the document is to deal with matters at source and prevent any adverse issues arising in the first instance, following which mitigation and proactive approaches are taken. Moving on to design. Design is a relatively subjective element, and the application has to be determined on the basis it's submitted. However, it is noted the design has evolved from collaboration with the secondary school parent reference group. Subject to final materials being agreed prior to construction and the building achieving a minimum BREEAM rating of good, which is the equivalent to the level 4 sustainable house building. The proposal can be deemed acceptable in plan terms. Building regulations will deal with the technical aspects of the building, such as thermal qualities, construction materials and ventilation in accordance with the regulations in force. And I would just mention that on the members update sheet there's an explanation about the ventilation system and thermal qualities and glazing of the design. This slide shows the coloured master plan for the school site with the outline of the sports pitches to the east, the multi-use games areas just adjoining the sports hall towards the west near the school building there, and the courtyard aspect of the school building with associated car parking and wildlife areas immediately adjoining. The proposal is to develop the school on a phased approach with the initial phase 1 intake of approximately 210 pupils. This will be followed by phase 2, which will bring the school up to a 1,200 pupil intake, with phase 3 being a future phase for expansion up to 1,500 places. It's envisaged that for construction purposes and because of issues raised about concerns on the health impacts on the school occupants, that the major works that could potentially give rise to impacts on the occupants for phase 2 may be undertaken with phase 1, but that is yet to be clarified in due course when the contractor is appointed. This is a sketch elevation of the front of the school with its 2 barn-like structures described by the architect and the 3 finger elements. This is a rear elevation and aerial plan view of the school site showing the courtyards without the landscaping at this point in time. Obviously, the colour master plan demonstrated the sort of landscaping envisaged for these courtyards. This is aerial sketch view from the southwest, or looking at the front towards the back. And then I'll move on to the other matters that are the main conditional matters that have been covered as part of the application following thorough assessment of due process. It's considered that these matters can be satisfactorily covered by condition, and these cover working hours, community use hours, materials, archaeology, lighting, landscaping, highways, and access, the Kent, which is very important, site contamination, flood risk and drainage. Therefore, having carefully assessed the application and the relevant policy as indicated on this slide and all other material considerations, it is recommended that the committee authorize the head of development management to grant planning permission subject to the conditions contained in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Neil. Right, we now come on to the speakers. We'll just remind both speakers and members we do face some time constraints tonight. We need to finish this meeting at 10:30. We'll have to pass a special resolution to carry it through to 11 o'clock. I don't want to wish in any way to stifle comment, but please bear that in mind when you speak. And first of all, can I invite Pam Stubbs on behalf of Barking Parish Council.
Hopefully it will be very, very quick. Barking Parish Council fully supports the proposal to build a secondary school which will be within Barking on the SDL site. A school serving the southern part of the borough is much needed and has been for many years, and we've been asking for it for years. We are absolutely delighted it will be in our parish, but we do have some observations which need to be considered with this application. This comes from the whole parish council. The school's not in Ardfield, it's wholly within Barking Parish. In its early years at least, the majority of pupils will come from the parishes from the south of the borough. The census of 2011 shows a 5 to 18 year population of 1,000 for each of Finchampstead North and South, and 500 each for Arborfield and Barking, which takes no account of the current students at the Reamy School. The working name of the school during its construction should be Wokingham South. This is first and foremost a school, so we should start by getting the geography right, please. There are serious concerns about access to the school for those pupils who live within the existing residential areas. To enable safe access, footpaths and cycleways will be required that are off-road and which have hard all-weather surfaces. Any proposal, as indicated in the travel plan para 229, that suggests using existing roads such as Commonfield Lane, Barkham Street and Barkham Ride are completely unrealistic. These roads are narrow, congested and far too dangerous to permit cycling by young pupils. There needs to be urgency in the provision of a cycleway to Barkham Hill based on the bridleway BA11 and footpath BA10. Bridleway BA14, which runs along the Barkham-Finchampstead border, should be upgraded to an all-weather cycle route to Finchampstead. And a cycleway to Arborfield adjacent to Eversley Road is also a priority. Safe crossings must be provided at points where footpaths and cycleways cross any main roads. And these improvements must be in place before the school is occupied and cannot wait until houses are built if there's to be any hope of encouraging secondary pupils to make their own way safely to school. The number 3 Leopard bus potentially provides good access to most of the catchment area, but will need more frequent journeys during the peak periods. And a bus stop will have to be provided for school access, which wouldn't have any detrimental effect on the journey times for the bus. Finally, as the timing of this school build is extremely tight, we would be looking at a level of possible alternative accommodation, if necessary, so that prospective parents could be assured that their children would not be disadvantaged in any way during the early days of the school. Time is already very tight, and new parents are looking for satisfactory answers to the questions they already have concerning their children's next stage in their educational journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. PR clearing. Arla seems to have left, so we'll leave that one. So we now come on to those wishing to speak in support. We've got Brian Grady on behalf of the council's applicant, Lloyd Watkins from the Parents Reference Group. Ian, you've got a separate section.
Oh,
If I can kick off, Chair, I'm honoured and privileged to be able to talk to you this evening. There's a clear need for the school. The clear need for the school is evidenced in the secondary strategy that the Borough Council's published and the COOL strategy, both in terms of existing need for places, in terms of new housing, and in terms of the lack of a secondary school in the south of the borough. The benefits of this school are clear. The educational opportunities and outcomes for our youngsters in the south of the borough, choice, reduced travel for youngsters in the borough. The opportunity for the community, for the council, for parents and children is very clear. I've been very excited about the public and parental engagement, which has both helped shape the vision for this school and design, build and other related matters, including transport and travel. So this is an exciting and a wonderful opportunity for the Borough Council to work with the partners, community, parents to deliver this much needed provision in the south of the borough.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm speaking singly as a parent and representing, I hope, the views of many parents from the south of Wokingham. I have had 2 children pass through our finishing secondary schools in the borough, and they travel to school by bus or car. For 100% of the children who are going to secondary school from Pinchamstead have to travel in a motor vehicle to get to school, there being no school closer than 4.2 miles from my house. So 100% of children need a school that they can walk to if they are to follow healthy lifestyles and also be able to pursue after-school activities in a credible way, there being no facility for late buses. And this school locally to them would start a significant change in the atmospherics of going to school for all the children in Arborfield, Finchhampstead and the southern parts of Barkham. Currently, children in the south also have no realistic choice of school they can go to. Our wonderful schools in the town centre are at capacity and will get more full as the development in the town centre hit. Living out in the borders of the borough, you always are subject to the overcapacity rules, which ensures all the children in the southern parishes are second-class citizens when it comes to priorities for the best schools in the centre of the town. Again, a new school in the south would address that and readdress the prioritisation and give them a realistic chance of getting to a school of their choice. Finally, and most positively, this is a first new school for over 2 generations for Wokingham. First secondary school for over 2 generations. The first secondary school to be built in Wokingham in the 21st century. It is a wonderful opportunity to jump forward into a new world of education for the children of Wokingham. It will relieve pressure on the town centre and provide the children in the south with the best possible chance to go to an outstanding school nearby, on foot, on bikes, and have a healthy and wonderful time in the 5, 6 or 7 years of their education, rather than spending 2.5 hours on a bus a day.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, Ian Whittock, who's speaking as Deputy Executive Member for Children's Services. I think, Ian, you have specific responsibilities for your schools.
Thank you for taking some of my thunder. Thank you, Chair. Fellow members, as Simon says, I am here tonight in my capacity as Deputy Executive for Children's Services in place of Charlotte, who is, of course, the Executive. Why? Because my portfolio specifically covers the building of new schools. So you could say this school is my baby. Given that I've been working on this for 10 years, it's been a long pregnancy. And there is still some way to go. I entirely support everything that the 3 previous speakers have said. I should add, though, that there has been some ill-informed talk elsewhere about this being a substandard DFE designed school. In fact, the design of the school surpasses the DFE standard, since we have taken on board the many lessons learned by other authorities where the DFE standard has been found wanting. The design improves upon the standard with, for instance, better windows for heat retention in winter and cooling in summer, improved ventilation for better cooling, wider corridors for easier circulation of pupils, better storage for students' belongings, improved access points, breakout points. To name but a few, and there are quite a few. WBC is also working on a range of safe walking and cycling routes to the school, very much as Pam described a few minutes ago, plus some others she didn't mention, particularly along the 9 Mile Line. If these are delayed and don't actually have them fully in place, then it's more likely the cycling routes that we might not have in place, and not the footpaths. In time for the school to be open, we expect delay on buses, even though this is under 3 miles for most of the pupils that we're getting. I know it's outside the application, but I should also mention we expect to make use of the huge sports facility right next door, both for sports and the occasional large meetings or theatre productions. WBC is also scheduled to build a 4-lane swimming pool close to and partly for use by this school, for which obviously a separate application will come forward at an appropriate time. This school will have a very rural feel to it, rather than a cramped city school. It will largely be surrounded by an existing business park for which it is masked right now by trees. Green fields, the huge sports centre, and only later on, a district centre. It will be very highly welcomed by a wide section of the surrounding community. 6 years ago, residents were asked to point to a location on the map where they thought the school should be best located. The intended site is the very spot they chose that day. I commend this application to you.
Thank you, Ian. Again, I'm going to come. Well, I think we'll hear from everybody, and then we'll try and sweep up all the items, because there are obviously less points raised on this. But the points I have got already on the list are the issue of whether phase 1 and phase 2 can be delivered together as opposed to phase 1, and then phase 2, the need for cycleways and existing routes to be upgraded. Plan B, in terms of any unexpected delays in delivery of the schools for September 2016. I think those are the key points. So we now go over to members, and again, so I'll go to you, John, first as local board member of Park.
Thank you, Simon. I feel much the same as the 3 previous speakers. I only wish, having lived in Arborfield for 20 years, that my 3 children would have had the opportunity. I had many mornings of running around, rounding them up, trying to get them to the bus, then missing the bus, then driving at 80 miles an hour trying to get them to school. So I would welcome this. This will enhance. There are just a couple of pleas that I would make, though. We have a great opportunity here with sustainable travel, and I'm very, very happy to hear Ian speak about the buses. We should, wherever we possibly can with this school, with a very small number of children, try to make sure the buses work for the parents. And there's a number of things we can do to address that. The other thing that I would appeal for, and we are on a very tight schedule to deliver this school, and you won't hear this from me at any other development. It is a fairly remote site, so I would like to think we can be very flexible about the working hours. There's nothing that surrounds it. So really, speed is of the essence of delivering the school, and that's really all I've got to say about it. I just welcome it.
Okay, thank you. Throw it open to other members. Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Like most of the other speakers, this has been a long time coming. I know it's a complete opposite end to where my ward is, but having sat on school transport appeals is very relevant. It's very much needed. The only question I have is one of clarification, really, and as I haven't brought up archaeology tonight, I thought I'd better bring it up now. It's on condition 67, the second paragraph. Either I'm reading it wrong or I'm completely an idiot, but either's acceptable. But it says and shall provide for the in-situ preservation of any archaeological remains of national or regional importance should they occur on the site. And the archaeological investigation, recording and analysis of remains of lesser importance. That seems the wrong way round to me. I may be misinterpreting.
Okay. Right. I see no one else. Sorry. Chris B, then Chris S.
Well, it's really to repeat what John said. I don't know whether you want to pick the point up. Also, just ask why why there are such fairly stringent restrictions on working hours.
Okay, I'll comment on that in a minute.
Okay, thanks.
Chris?
Right. Thank you. My question really is, I'm looking for some clarification on phasing, how this actually works, how it ties in with the rate of progress with the house building programme. My concern is that the capacity should be there at the right time. Also, what happens if we're over capacity? Because I think, isn't there this Greenwich principle where anyone applies from outside, we've got the capacity, we have to take them in. If we lose the capacity for the people it's intended for, how are you going to handle the phasing? Thank you.
Right. Sorry, Tim. Yes. Sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to know why the ecology construction has to be confidential.
Okay. I suspect that may be because of a protected species, and some people's desire to identify where these protected species live. Is that correct? And I'm thinking of things like badgers. All hush hush. Right, Russell Boyd.
It's not much. It is quite a
Okay. Right, so I think we had a number of questions around the phasing, different aspects of the phasing. Firstly, whether we deliver phase 1 and 2 simultaneously or just phase 1. In fact, I think what we're being asked to approve tonight gives us the opportunity to have either of those, whichever we can do, I think. And then the other issue that was made by Chris about the phasing in terms of ensuring that we don't end up in a situation with a great big school with lots of spare capacity being filled with lots of kids coming up from Hampshire, for example. So then filling up the school and finding we can't get working with the kids.
That's an answer to my question as well, Chris.
Well, we have a whole lot.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms of the phased approach, the first phase is for the initial 210 pupil intake, and then phase 2 has the capacity up to 1,200. But it's envisaged that phase 1 and 2 may be delivered partly at the same time in terms of the phase 2 superstructure and foundations built at the same time as phase 1 to reduce any potential further risks to the occupants. The actual pupil intake is really a matter for the children's services to deal with.
So I think what we're hearing there, Chris, is the managing that potential for over or under capacity will come down to Brian Grady and his team. Don't know, Brian, whether you wanted to add something very quickly on that, just for clarification, please.
I've got some experience managing the, not pressing the buttons clearly, but I know how to manage schools. In terms of Greenwich judgment, it's about getting the phasing right and talking to parents and making sure we've done our demand analysis right. And we've had lots of experience, particularly through the primary phase of doing that. This will be our first journey into that on a secondary basis, but we feel assured that we can time the phasing with our demand that we've got coming through. And we'll be checking that on an annual basis.
So, from what I hear, the shell's built, but we've actually used the control of the fitting out as the means of ensuring the capacity is balanced. Thank you.
Okay, can we take Bob's question about archaeology and the slightly ambiguous condition, 67?
Yeah, condition 67 is actually on the outline application, but you're right, that is related to archaeology. I'm not sure that it is sort of around, because it says the most important remains, i.e. those of national or regional importance, should be preserved in situ, and those of lesser importance should be recorded. Nonetheless, that there's sufficient sort of flexibility in how the condition is worded that the work should be undertaken in accordance with the risk scheme mitigation, and that there's scope for discussion with the county archaeologists what the most appropriate solution is to what's found.
I can understand you preserving remains of national significance if they're available for investigation at a later date. But I can't understand remains of national significance being preserved in situ and no one knows what's going on.
think there's sufficient flexibility in the condition that the archaeologist can make a call based on what actually is found to identify the best solution for it.
Okay.
Not convinced.
Okay, cycleways, provision and upgrade of cycleways. Comment on that, please?
I can. Yeah, well, obviously we've heard that the application for the major part of the scheme has been approved. We're working obviously with phases to understand that. I think there is some understanding, yes, there is a need, and there is an issue with some of the existing routes. There are areas that lead out obviously to the north, Byway 18, etc. I think, however, in the earlier phases, it's difficult to understand where footpaths can go, but obviously we don't understand the reserve matters of the first part, so we don't want to be abortive in delivering certain elements, but obviously there is a concern with some of the pupils getting to school. However, obviously from talking with the applicant team and the submission of the details, there's the desire for the travel plan, which is a framework at the moment, but will also be worked up once the occupier of the school is understood, and obviously the first intake is also understood, that there will be elements such as a park and stride from potentially the Hogwood Industrial Park, which is partly operated by the council, California Country Park, and also improvements there, which could allow for maybe a minibus of sorts to kind of provide the shuttle through the first early phases. Also, potentially improvements. There are footpaths that do run along Princess Marina Drive down, leading through to Shearlands and into the first part of the development. And obviously, part of the site is under control of, well, all of the site is under control of Crest Nicholson, obviously leading down to the parcel for the school. And as such, the Hall Road and access road, subject to the 9 mile ride extension being delivered in part through to Shearlands Road, a footpath improvement could be provided internally within the site, which will allow for potential drop-off and or buses to come into the site as well as things progress. So there are details that do need to be worked up. There are conditions in place to obviously allow for that information to be submitted and approved by the council, and that can be worked up, I think, as the scheme progresses and as the major scheme progresses, to understand how they both tie together through the first and second phases of development.
Okay, then one of the other points covered was Chris Barring mentioned the issue about hours of work. Hours of work and the fact that as a more remote site we could allow more generous hours of work. That's actually, as well as the condition, which is condition 3 on page 149, there's further comment on page 177, 90.96, which looks at flexibility. I think the issue is here we're going to stick with the agreed hours, but do bear in mind that there is always the flexibility there, which adds, unless otherwise agreed in writing with the local planning board, which gives us some control over it. Okay, so that would mean if there was a particular project that needed to be completed and was going to run very late in the day, that would give us the flexibility to consider allowing that. So I think we'll stick with the normal hours, which we've applied pretty rigidly to all other developments of the borough, but allow that there's some flexibility, providing that is agreed in advance. Okay.
Okay, I do think it's important though, because...
Well, clearly, I think it's in everybody's interest that the school is delivered at the earliest opportunity. Could we also talk about option B, as I referred to it? Oh, I didn't know whether Matt wanted to speak, or whether you wanted to speak. Or obviously, we're working towards success, not failure. But could somebody comment on what the fallback position is if something untoward occurs that means we're not able to have a school available for use in September 2016?
We've had 2 consistent contingency plans in place since the start of the project, pretty much. One is that we would negotiate and confirm usage of some of the legacy buildings on site. There's one potential option. Our other contingencies being expansion of current school sites. Our clear preferred option is to open the new school on time, and therefore the first contingency B, if you like, is to look at using the legacy buildings that are on the Garrison site.
Okay, thank you. The other point I just wanted to cover was perhaps one for you, Ian. If we're going to be providing buses to take kids to school from within 3 miles, are we doing that on a very clear basis as to how long we're doing that for, at what stage, we're going to turn around and say, no, sorry, you can't come on the bus because you live half a mile down the road and there are now alternative ways of getting to school?
Yeah, clearly it's against our standard policy of the 3 miles. It's a contingency arrangement to cover the interim period whilst we actually get those safe walking routes and cycling routes in place.
Okay, I would encourage all those involved to make it very clear then that this is a temporary arrangement, because people very quickly forget. You know, they accept it's a temporary arrangement, and then you suddenly tell them they have to start paying or they can't come on the bus and they don't like it. So let's make it really clear with people up front that this is a limited time offer, so to speak. Now, members, we've got 4 minutes left. I see 2 other members indicating, are these quick questions or do you need to pick for extra time? Right, quick question, Rochelle.
You're saying that you're going to limit the bus service to only a limited time offer. I'd like to say that we continue having the bus service for the time the initial intake actually starts, so therefore they don't get into bad habits. They got into this nice habit of taking the bus, not taking a car. Let's do it continually for a while so we can encourage people to take buses and to take alternate means of transportation if it's less than 3 miles, because 3 miles is pretty far to walk.
Okay, obviously what you're suggesting and what I was referring to just now is something beyond
The
the remit
opposite.
of the planning committee. But I'm
It
sure,
would just be
I'm
a
sure
nice
people
thought
from
to
Children's
the
Services have heard
service,
that.
children's services.
Lindsay?
Yes, it's probably unusual to have 2 people who are researchers, not in archaeology, but either did research as well. But and the point that Bob was raising on the archaeological side of things, I think the wording is there. I think I know what they're trying to do, but what it doesn't necessarily allow, if something significant is found, then the archaeologists will want to come along and they will investigate it, and you could get delayed. And I think what you're trying to do with that is to say that there's something there that can stay in the ground but not delayed. If that's what you're meaning, we need to be very careful, because if something very significant does come, that could overrule. The outside bodies will come in and do something. So we just need to understand how we deal with that one.
You're presenting us with a problem. Do we have a solution?
The problem is this relates to the outline application, or the application we're considering here. So it's obviously we discussed earlier there was provision to change conditions after the decision was made.
That's to the site,
Yeah, I think there's been some confusion.
Use the microphone.
Condition 67 relates to the first application.
That's right. It's not the second.
It doesn't relate to the second.
Well, what's the archaeological one for the second one? Sorry, it's the same area.
Condition 5 on page 149. Don't forget, this second application covers a very much smaller site.
If I'm on the wrong page, I do
149. It's on.
Page 149, bottom. Condition 5, heading archaeology. Could our 2 archaeological experts have a quick scan of that and confirm whether that's acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
This one.
Right. Any other members wishing to speak? Okay. I see no one else wishing to speak. We have members again, a very clear recommendation in front of us. The application F 2015-0001 for a new secondary school at Land, Harbourfield Garrison, Giggs Lane, Harbourfield, should be given approval, subject to the conditions included in the report, and also confirmed on page 23 and page 24 of the members' update. So, could all those members wishing to support the officer's recommendation?
If you're voting for the one in Barking, I'll vote for the one in Barking.
I said, it's at
It's a
Harbourfield
Barking-
Garrison. All those members wishing to indicate, please show. And again, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Right, members, I need to just